a video. You probably have to get the TV turned on and get the video going. If you'd like, we didn't have anyone on the sheet to do Sunday school today, but Melinda has graciously agreed to do Sunday school with the kids downstairs. So if any of your kids want to go to Sunday school, go with Melinda. Bless you. Oh, gotta turn the video on. Okay, so this morning we had several sheets given to us about pre-flood things, flood things, and then post-flood. I think we'll try to get as far as we can get, and then we'll kind of figure out what we'll do for next week and maybe wrapping it all up. If we get through everything, we'll get through everything. If not, we'll kind of go back and look at stuff. I think the reason why this has become so interesting is because there's a lot of people talking about old earth stuff right now. Like, love him or hate him, Joe Rogan has 3 people who come on his show routinely that talk about old earth stuff. He's given them a platform, and now these people are going out and lecturing. So you're hearing a lot of things. So what this is basically is not pre-recorded history, but much earlier than we're used to thinking about recorded history. You know, we want to think back. Well, what's probably the oldest history we talk about? Maybe the Sumerian culture, like the land of Ur that Abraham comes out of. That's maybe about as far back as we want to go, deep into Egyptian history. But there's a lot of evidence to suggest that there is, well, that's strange, history that goes beyond that or earlier than that. I think that's what it is. Okay, let's see if I can get that to I don't know why it changed. I thought it was mirrored, but you got it. You're on it. This guy, technological maven is what he is. So the idea that what predates history that we kind of know or comfortable with, and also then what do we know about that ancient history, and how does that affect how we look at things? Now, one of the interesting things is, do you remember the names of the 2 guys? One, Graham, what's Graham's last name? Graham Hancock, and then the bigger guy, what's his name? These are the 2 ones that talk the most. Graham Hancock, and then there's another fellow, and what they talk a lot about is ancient cataclysm. There's a lot of evidence to suggest with these ancient cultures that some kind of ancient cataclysm happened. Some people talk about the world's magnetic poles shifting. Some people talk about asteroids, large bodies striking the earth, right? And then the effects of those things. They talk about flooding and stuff. We as Christians, sometimes when I listen to Graham Hancock and other people, I just kind of want to bang my head against the door because they keep they're just kind of skirting around the edge of it, and they never say, well, maybe the biblical narrative of the flood is the actual story. This is not that complicated, but they don't ever go there. I think a lot of Christians are becoming kind of interested because they can do the math. They can be like, well, this sounds like the flood narrative, and everything that to be connected with it. There's a lot of interest in I think, pre-historical things, and also people want to talk about the flood because they think that kind of factors into this, and then pre-flood things too. Like, what happens between Cain and Abel right? The story there, and then chapter basically 6 when the flood's coming. What happens between those 2 points? How much history passes? So we'll talk a little bit about that today. But it wouldn't be right if we went past Trinity without listening to this bad boy. I'm going to see if I can plug in the microphone. Would be better. I think it's right here. There we go.
Okay, Patrick, tell us a bit more about
Hold on,
this
let me turn it up.
Trinity thing. Yeah, Patrick, tell us. But remember that we're simple people without your fancy education and books and learning.
Oh, maybe not. What did I do there? Why did it go to the other one? Anybody know? I'll try that. See if that works better. Okay, see. Now it's time to go through the.
Okay, Patrick, tell us a bit more about this Trinity thing. Yeah, Patrick, tell us. But remember that we're simple people without your fancy education and books and learning. And we're hearing about all of this for the first time. So try to keep it simple. Okay, Patrick? Yeah, real simple, Patrick.
Sure, there are 3 persons of the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Yet there is only one God.
Don't get what you're saying here, Patrick. Not picking up what you're laying down here, Patrick. Could you use an analogy, Patrick?
Sure, the Trinity is like water, and how you can find water in 3 different forms: liquid, and ice, and vapor.
That's modalism, Patrick.
What?
Modalism, an ancient heresy confessed by teachers such as Noetus and Sibelius, which espouses that God is not 3 distinct persons, but that he merely reveals himself in 3 different forms. This heresy was clearly condemned in Canon 1 at the First Council of Constantinople in 381 AD, and those who confess it cannot rightly be considered a part of the Church Catholic. Come on, Patrick. Yeah, get it together, Patrick.
Okay, then the Trinity is like the sun in the sky, where you have the star, and the light, and the heat.
Oh, Patrick. Come on, Patrick. That's Arianism, Patrick.
Arianism?
Yes, Arianism, Patrick. A theology which states that Christ and the Holy Spirit are creations of the Father and not one in nature with him. Exactly like how heat and light are not the star itself, but are merely creations of the star. That's a bad analogy, Patrick. You're the worst, Patrick.
All right, sorry. The Trinity is like this 3-leaf clover here.
I'm going to stop you right there, Patrick. Yeah, hold your horses, Patrick. You're about to confess partialism.
Partialism?
Yes, partialism, a heresy which asserts that the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are not distinct persons of the Godhead, but are different parts of God, each composing 1/3 of the divine.
And who confesses the heresy of partialism?
The first season of the cartoon program Voltron, where 5 robot lion cars merge together to form one giant robot samurai, obviously.
I've never heard of Voltron.
Of course you haven't. It's not going to exist for another 1,500 years now, Patrick. Yeah, get with the program, Patrick. I mean, really, Patrick. I'm going to stab you in the face, Patrick. Okay, that was probably a bit much.
All right, I'll try again. The Trinity is like how the same man can be a husband and a father and an employer.
Modalism again.
All right, then it's like the 3 layers of an apple.
Partialism revisited.
Fine. The Trinity is a mystery which cannot be comprehended by human reason, but is understood only through faith and is best confessed in the words of the Athanasian Creed, which states that we worship one God in Trinity and Trinity in unity, neither confusing the persons nor dividing the substance, that we are compelled by the Christian truth to confess that each distinct person is God and Lord, and that the deity of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit is one, equal in glory, co-equal in majesty.
Well, why didn't you just say that, Patrick? Yeah, quit beating around the bush, Patrick. Now let's all put on some giant green foam hats, get riotously drunk, and vomit in the Chicago River to celebrate our conversion.
So what do you guys do for a living?
Well, we come from a long line of snake farmers, Patrick, but truth be told, business has been real bad lately.
Oh. Yeah, about that.
I don't know if you know the story, but they're supposed to be talking to St. Patrick, who makes up bad Trinity analogies, and they say that their job is to be snake charmers. Well, if you know anything about St. Patrick, the story goes that he charmed all the snakes off of the island of Ireland. So, and it's just a silly joke. All right, so let's get to more concrete stuff, shall we? Open up your Bibles. Let's take a look at Genesis chapter 4. Can I get whoever? Would you mind getting that light back on? That'd be great. Okay. So we're going to, let's see here, just kind of really quickly go through this. I'm not going to read every single thing here. Adam knew chapter 4, verse 1, Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I've gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And again, she bore his brother Abel. So she gave birth to Cain, and then later on she gave birth to Abel. They're not twins, rather they're brothers. Yeah. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground, farmer. Yeah. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought to the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. Now this is, I've said it before, but I'll reiterate it again in case you don't remember. Mankind doesn't start eating meat until after the flood. This has always confused me a little bit that Abel brings to God the fat portions of the, in other words, when they say fat portions, they usually mean, how many of you have ever, this is kind of, I hope this isn't too much, how many of you have ever butchered an animal? Yeah? And for everybody here, have you ever come in contact with that, especially, how many of you have ever butchered a cow? Butchered a cow? Okay. Ever come in contact with that fat that's around the viscera, around the body, the really good, hard lard fat, that you save, you make lard out of? That's really what this is talking, the fat portions. That lard is the healthiest lard in the animal and is also the highest calorie content. So forget all the things you know about diet from the modern world. If you're trying to stay alive, what has the most energy in the animal? The fat does. Like pure caloric value, if you're trying to keep your body going, the fat is going to be the easiest thing to eat that's going to provide the most amount of calories and keep you alive for as long as possible. The same thing's true of the organ meat as well. A lot of the organ meat has high cholesterol and fat content as well. So even though most people don't like eating it or care to, kidneys, the Bible talks a lot about how kidneys are kind of chosen portion fat as well as the liver, right? So these kind of things. Is Abel killing these animals and offer? I think he is. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. That's what I'm saying. Well, let's jump forward and look at it real quick. Okay, so jump all the way forward to, let's see here. We're into Genesis 8. Maybe it's 9. Okay, here we go. Yeah, Genesis 9, chapter 3. The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth and upon every bird of the heavens, upon everything that creeps in the ground and all fish of the sea. So this is still to this day why a lot of times even when you get up on an animal that could kill you, they'll usually run the other direction because there's just this thing in them, which also is so strange. Do you know, like, a lot of people live in areas where lions and tigers live. And yet the number of, especially in Africa, the number of man-eating lions is very, at least in recorded history, very small in number. Even though we are totally easy targets for lions. For some reason, lions don't kind of figure out that they can eat humans really easily. Same thing true of killer whales. They're not, they do attack people, but they don't often, and we would be really easy targets. Yeah? So that's just to point out that certain things in creation persist, okay? So we get into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. And as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. So before he gave Adam and Eve everything in the Garden of Eden that was good for food, i.e. plants, plants, fruits, possibly nuts. We don't really know. We know that they speak about fruit. We know that's there, but like, were there nuts there? I would guess probably trees. There's nuts, fruits, of certain types of vegetables. There's a lot of evidence to suggest, too, that vegetables and certain kinds of plants, like potatoes, for example, there's more evidence to suggest that you should, like, I remember 10 years ago they used to say, you should eat the skin of the potatoes. And you've heard this now. Now they're saying you shouldn't eat the skins of the potatoes because that's actually where the plant gathers up its own defenses to keep other animals from eating it. In other words, there's poisons in the skin to keep other animals from eating it, and you probably shouldn't eat the skins, right? So there's, I know it's crazy. Everything always changes all the time. Point being is that I wonder if before the fall in the garden, plants, vegetables, fruits didn't have kind of some of these natural defenses in them. Then sin comes around, everything gets changed, right? So God gives them the plants, and then here in chapter 9, after the flood, he gives them also animals to eat. And I do actually have some reasons for this. If you want to hold on that for a bit, or if you want to talk about it more, we can right now. Go ahead. We've got a question back here. Oh, yeah, okay, I'm sorry. I wasn't tracking with you. Yeah.
Verse 30, and to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food.
Sure.
Yeah, so not to man. That's to every beast of the earth and every bird in the heavens, I have given every green plant.
That's 130, you're saying?
Because the verse before that, and God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding its seed that is on the face of the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit, you shall have them for food.
Mm-hmm.
Then he talks about the beast of the earth and giving them green plants.
So you're thinking he's talking about like fruits, probably. Yeah. I would agree with that because fruits are like the simplest green thing let's say, fruits are the simplest non-animal thing to eat, right? Like the caloric value is right there. You just take it off the tree, you eat it. Sometimes they're skinned. Where plants takes more effort to eat them. Vegetables take more effort. Well, yeah, but I'm saying like, tubers or things like it takes more effort to eat them than it does to eat fruit. So maybe it is just that there's enough value, nutritional value in fruit in the garden for them to subsist off of that. Yeah, which is interesting too because then in Revelation, what do we get? We get a tree that has 12 different kinds of fruit on it, and it's meant for people to eat to be sustained in new heavens and new earth. Now, I don't know if that's like an analogy that means there'll be plenty in the new heavens, new earth, and so or will we actually be eating food in the new heavens? It's hard to say. Yeah, it is. Because it could just be an analogy to say people worry about, will there be enough to eat? That's always the thing people think about. So then he says, well, here's this tree, and it's got fruit that basically is all the time, and it's 12, so there's not just all the time, but it's also not like manna. There's variety. There's 12 different kinds. So it's just like an analogy, or will there actually be this tree, and will we actually eat this fruit? Because they ate fruit in the Garden of Eden, and they weren't sinful. They were perfect, and they were eating in the garden, which I got to be honest with you, it kind of gives me I like the idea of eating in eternity. I know it sounds really stupid to say, but think about how many good memories you have that involved eating. How many huge moments in your life were around a dinner table, or around a table, or eating food with someone, breaking bread with someone, right? Like it's just a huge part of life that has so many good things to it. I don't necessarily want to say goodbye to that. And maybe we won't. Who knows? What's that? Well, I remember, I have this really great memory. One year we had a really good year in Breckenridge, really good growing year. And it was a really good growing year for a friend of mine's apple tree. She had 2 apple trees out at her farm. And they produced these humongous apples, and she had so many apples she didn't know what to do with, and they were so good. I mean, she must have given us 4 bushels of apples, and I'm telling my little kids, like, you want an apple? You eat an apple. Eat them as fast as you can eat them. And so, like, Graceland is, like, eating, she was, like, 3 at the time. She'd eat half an apple, and then she'd put it away, and she'd start another one because there were so many. We didn't even care. Like, fine, go ahead, do it, you know. And then they had so many apples that they went into the church kitchen, and they made apple pies for 3 days. And she still had apples left over. Yeah, and so that, I mean, that's a good memory around not steak. So I mean, there you go. Okay, so yes, we'll step back there for a minute. They're not eating animals. So Abel is sacrificing an animal. So here's the weird thing. Maybe there's it points to a greater reality, doesn't it? That there's a necessity of sacrifice even before we're even eating it. This lamb is sacrificed for a thank offering or an offering to God, and it points to what? It points to Jesus. That there's a necessity for sacrifice, even if we're not going to eat the animal. That comes later, obviously, but it's interesting. Okay. So we get into this problem where God likes Abel's offering. He doesn't like Cain's. And I put in a little evidence here. So this is an interesting, to do well, be accepted, amend, use a right, benefit, to be, make better, seem best. I think this would be kind of the thing here, like beautiful or God is happy with it, right? So Abel has offered an offering that God is happy about, that he's pleased with. And I think the problem comes not in the offering itself. It's not because one is a lamb and one is fruit of the ground. It's that Abel gives his offering in faith and Cain does not. Seems to be the case. It seems to be the case because we find out what Cain does later, and there's definitely some kind of problem, faith problem, trust problem here, right? So that's why the offerings look down upon. And I just want to point out here, like, the fall of sin is the most recent thing before Cain and Abel. Now, it's hard to know exactly how much time has passed between Adam and Eve, the fall and the sin, and Cain and Abel. But these two guys are probably adults. Because in what you find in the Old Testament is you have patriarchs. Patriarchs like Abraham, Jacob, Job. Job is later in the book of the Bible, but it's actually probably rightly placed in the time of the patriarchs. And what's one really interesting fact about the patriarchs? Well, there's no priests around. There's nobody to offer sacrifices. So who offers sacrifices for their families? The patriarchs do. So if Abel and Cain are offering up sacrifices, they're probably at least of the age of maybe being considered to be a patriarch. It doesn't say anything about them being married, but they're probably of the age that they could be married, because if they weren't, I would imagine that Adam would be offering the sacrifice for them. Okay, so just to give you a sense of how old they are. So some time has passed between the fall and then Cain and Abel are, like, let's say ballpark 18 to 30, somewhere in that range, probably considered adults at this point, offering their own sacrifices. There's a question back here. Oh, because God told them. We're going to see later on there's a fellow named Enoch, and there's another fellow named Noah that walk with God, which means they have a very close, Enoch and Noah have a very, very close relationship with God. But all of them, I think, talk with God on a regular basis, i.e., like the Garden of Eden, where God would walk with Adam and Eve in the cool of the day. I think the only reason they know to bring a sacrifice is most likely because beyond our pages, God has asked for one. Or at least put down some kind of understanding as to why or what they're doing. I wouldn't think they would just do it kind of randomly. Yeah, there's probably some kind of direction. Remember, too, Luther talks pretty clearly about this. How do Adam and Eve worship? I've said this before, but I'll just say it again. How do Adam and Eve worship in the Garden of Eden? How do they worship? God gives them a rule, and they follow it. Which really worship for us is kind of the same thing. Maybe, and we could maybe even say rule, could take that out and say God gives them a word and they follow it. And what do? God gives us word and we follow it, right? It's more complicated. It's more, there's more to it than that, but you can see how he says, don't eat from this tree. And they trust God, they do what he says, and they don't eat from the tree, at least until the serpent comes in. And I would say too, Margie, that if they didn't have direct conversation with God, which I think they did, maybe they derived out of the idea that not eating from the tree of good and evil is a sacrifice, right? Like they kind of give up the ability to have this thing that they want to have. I don't know. That's a stretch, but try to give me maybe more of a biblical answer as opposed to it's probably between the lines. So. No. There are thank offerings that are entirely grain offerings. Yeah, there's all kinds of different offerings. There's plenty of offerings that are, sometimes you offer up actually bread too. Sometimes you offer grain. A wave offering is a grain offering. Yeah. So this is, if you compare this to the sacrificial system that comes about later in Leviticus, this is not unusual. That some offering comes, in other words, some offerings were first fruits of the harvest. Actually, the one we just celebrated, Pentecost, is first fruits of the harvest, the first fruits of the barley harvest, and they would bring in a sacrifice of barley, yeah, in the form of bread. Yeah, go ahead. 3 patriarchs that I named? Well, there's lots of them, more than the 3 I named. I mean, but Noah would actually, I guess, be one. Jacob is one for sure. Isaac, Abraham, Job is a patriarch. And a patriarch is specific in how they work. They're a believer. They're part of God's tribe, so to speak. They're a believer. They usually listen to God when he talks to them, which is kind of key. And they offer sacrifices for the family. And then usually they have kids. They're in the line of succession as well of Christ. Right? I don't know, Job wouldn't be in there, obviously, but Job does everything that a patriarch would. He operates the same way. And the only reason we have fathers offering sacrifice at this time is because we don't get the sacrificial system or priests until Exodus. So, okay. So we'll skip kind of the rest of the thing here. The problem is that there's a faith problem. So not long after Adam and Eve, we've got faith issues, we've got trust issues, and then eventually we have what? Murder. And I bring all this up to say things get really bad really fast. We kind of assume that it can't, but in a vacuum, things can get really bad really fast. We have been very blessed that we have a government system that has done an okay job at reining in our lesser base desires. But it isn't perfect. I mean, I'm sure many of you can think about what government was when you were kids and what it is now, and it's not a shadow of what it used to be, right? The thing that really throws me for a loop is, when we get into this government stuff, is judges. You used to have judges who said they were constitutional people, and what that meant is that they based every one of their decisions on what the Constitution actually said. And that's gone for the most part. And I think when that goes completely, we're really going to struggle as a country to kind of hold this government together. Because then it comes down, if we don't have anything based upon a written document that doesn't change, then it's only based on what people want. And as we see in the Bible, when people want stuff, things get bad real fast. Real fast. Okay, so, by the way, little thought here. Eve says in 4:1, which is interesting, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. Some scholars suggest that she saw Cain and thought he was the Messiah, going all the way back to 1 chapter ago. So if you think Paul is crazy that he thought he was going to see Jesus come back in his lifetime, you got to talk to Eve. She thought the Messiah was going to come like in the next chapter. of her life, right? Look, nope. Cain is not the Messiah that was promised. That'll come later. Also, interesting too, who's firstborn? Cain is. This is going to be a consistent biblical trope to turn our human philosophies or thoughts on their head. That almost every single time, I mean, this guy right here, Jacob, second-born son, but the promise comes through Jacob, not Esau, right? And it just happens again and again and again. And I think what God is trying to say when he does that, he's saying, my ways, not your ways. And then when we look at Jesus, you know, which is so funny, you still see people look at Jesus and say, this is the king of the universe. He died on a cross. And you just got to hear God continue to say, my ways, not your ways. I know what I'm doing. Oh, man. There's nothing, I tell you what, as a father, there's nothing more frustrating than having your kids constantly question you as though they know what, it's like you don't know what you're doing. It drives you nuts. And if it drives me nuts, I got to imagine it drives God the Father crazy, right? Like, so anyway, I probably shouldn't be so sensitive. Okay, so I think you know the story of Cain and Abel. We get to this little part here. Jump forward with me to like verse 16. Verse 15, actually. Then the Lord said to him, not so, if anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken upon him sevenfold. And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest anyone who found him should attack him. Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Okay, so Cain's worried that now that he's killed his brother Abel and God has cursed him, that he'll be killed as soon as he walks away from wherever they're at, which we assume is close to the Garden of Eden still. Like they went outside the garden, they can't go back in the garden, but they're somewhere near where the garden was. I think I had a little picture I wanted to show you. Where was it? Yeah, there it is. So it's really interesting. I watched a really cool video where an archaeologist was talking about that there's a dry riverbed that starts right here and runs all the way like through here to Saudi Arabia. And there's some people who think that the way that the Hebrew works is that what Moses might have meant is not that all the rivers flowed out of the Garden of Eden, but all of them flowed towards the Garden of Eden, right? Which then, that makes a ton of sense because the Tigris and Euphrates come together and flow here, right? And this other, which is, we think now that it came through here and used to empty right here. Okay, it's a dry riverbed that runs all the way to Saudi Arabia. We think this might have been the Pishon River that's mentioned in Genesis. So there's 4 rivers, the Pishon, the Gihon, the Euphrates, and the Tigris. Okay? Well, the Euphrates and Tigris are all here. The Pishon is right here. A lot of people think the Gihon is the Nile, but the Blue Nile, but I don't know. Then again, we don't know what the flood could have done to topography in that area. It's hard to say if the Nile is indeed the Gihon River, but it could be. So does that mean that Eden is somewhere in this area in the Euphrates River Delta? Remember, too, that a river silts in, right? There's a really cool example of this is Ephesus. The city used to be on the ocean. And you look at Ephesus now, the ocean is literally, 5 miles away from? It's about 5 miles from the ocean bay now, where it used to be on the bay. The rivers silt in over time. So, all of this land might not have been here, right? The opening to the ocean might have been here. Is the Garden of Eden somewhere in this area? I mean, who knows? Is it important? Not really. The flood just wipes out all topography anyway, so who knows? It doesn't matter. But is this the land of Nod then? I mean, it could be. I just thought I'd put it in there. A lot of this stuff is speculative. I want you to know that. There's no hard and fast evidence for any of this. Okay. That's some cool stuff. I don't know if we're going to get to it. Bummer. Okay. Cain's family. This factors into this whole story of, I know many of you are really, Pastor Smith and I were thinking this is the reason people want to know about pre-flood earth, because this Nephilim thing. What the heck are Nephilim? What are giants? All this kind of stuff, right? This stuff factors in, because what we have is this family tree, where we have Cain and his family, Enoch, Irad, Jalel, Mahushalel, Lamech, Jabal, Jubal, Tubal, Cain, and Naamah, which is, these 3 are sons, this is a daughter. Okay. Now, Abel, obviously, his line is cut, right? Then Adam and Eve have a third son, Seth, and out of Seth comes the sons of God. So we have Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch. Enoch walked with God, and then God took him up into heaven without him dying. Interesting fellow. Methuselah, Lamech, Noah, and then the three sons of the flood. Post-flood history has a lot to do with these three guys, but pre-flood history has a lot to do with these people. Okay, well, let's just keep going. Like his brother Abel, Cain's family begins a differentiation of tasks. So if we get up into here, I think Tubal-Cain was a guy who started working with metals. What's the primary job of Adam when he's kicked out of the garden? What does he do? He's a farmer. He works the land. I kind of think this is what God actually wanted people to do. And I'm going to give you a really, this is a very Luddite approach, okay? When you are living a subsistence lifestyle and you're farming, what are you probably going to do with regularity? You're going to pray. You're going to be close to God because not every year is going to be a good year, right? When we differentiate tasks, what happens? It allows more people to do less work to make more money or more things to support themselves. I'm not necessarily arguing with it or saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying it's part of our history, right? So as we grow in ease, what almost always happens when we get more and more stuff and life gets more and more easier, what happens? Does God become more of a priority or less of a priority? It's not always the case, but it's the case a lot, right? And by the way, we should be honest too. Happens to farmers too. When farmers have humongous farms and they're doing pretty well for themselves, they get pretty caught up in their money as well. You're not immune because you're working the land. I think you're immune when you have to kind of struggle a little bit to make life work, which is why, we've entered into post-World War II, we entered into one of the most decadent times, not just in our history, in human history. We had more money and more wealth than any civilization that ever existed before us. And what happened to the faith life in our country? You look at any statistic, it nosedives after World War II. I mean, it takes time. It doesn't start happening until the 70s and 80s, but it really is nosediving. Decadence does not breed necessarily a strong faith and faith life of people in a country, right? So I'm wondering here, Cain is starting to show, the cracks are showing, right? Differentiation of labor, unwillingness to kind of trust or rest beneath God's good graces. They want to trust themselves and their own things, their own doings, their own work. You're starting to see the reasons why God says in Genesis 6, he's very sad about what he's created and he needs to wipe it out. You're already seeing it in Cain's family. Yeah? Differentiation of tasks means that they can do less and have more and worry less. Okay? So what do we have? Tubal-Cain works with bronze and iron. Jubal, he was the father of all those who play the lyre and pipe. I probably shouldn't complain too much because I like playing music, but there it is. And then we get up to, let's see here, there's another one I wanted to point out. Jabal was the father of those who dwell in tents, so probably like a herder, a shepherd of some sort, yeah? And then there's one more, we go all the way back to Enoch. Enoch built a city. So Enoch's a builder, an architect maybe, or a contractor. Enoch's the guy who builds, right? So we've got people in this chain who don't want to be maybe what was Cain? Cain was a farmer. And then his family after, and they kind of depart. Here, the really crazy part is you don't hear much about Seth's family in terms of them differentiating tasks, like what they do. You just hear about their lives, their faith lives, right? So here, let's take a quick look. Check it out, chapter 5, the book of the generations of Adam. So when Adam lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness, Seth. The days of Adam after he fathered Seth were 800 years. So Adam lived to be how old? 930 years old. Yeah. Seth had lived 105 years. He fathered Enosh. Seth lived after he fathered Enosh 807 years and had other sons and daughters. All the days of Seth were 912 years. Enosh had lived 90 years. He fathered Kenan. Enosh lived, after he fathered Kenan, 815 years. And we keep going. As you can see down the thing here. I don't know if you can see it very well, but right here. So we're here. Seth, Enosh, Kenan. We're up to here. Mahalalel. Mahalalel lived after he fathered Jared 830 years. So he was 895 years when he died. Jared was 962 years when he died. Enoch, thus all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch's an unusual one because God walks with him, and then there's two people that didn't die in the Old Testament. Who are they? One's Enoch. Who's the other one? Elijah. Elijah's taken up to heaven in a fiery chariot. He doesn't die, as far as we know. And what is the process of dying? I'm not sure I understand it 100%. I probably won't until I die. So, does Enoch going into heaven and existing in a different kind of reality, is that death for him? Or it's not. He doesn't physically die. I don't know what it is, but anyway, Enoch is taken to heaven. So his life is kind of cut short compared to all of his contemporaries. They're all like 900, 800 years. Enoch is just 300. Probably because God decided to take him. Why does God decide to take Enoch? Well, Enoch walks with God. God favors him. God loves him. What is he trying to do? I think he might be trying to spare him from everything that's going on in the world. Just another thought talking about where we get to in Genesis chapter 6, how bad things get. Okay? Going on then. Methuselah lived 187 years. I'll just do the whole total. Lived 969 years, and then he died. Lamech lived 777 years, and then he died. After Lamech comes Noah, and Noah has his three sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Okay, so we've gotten to the Noah part of the story. So look at this, chapter 6. Well, actually, I have something I want to talk about here real quick. What factors lead to long lifespans? Well, first and foremost, God loves them. They're his people. So we're going to do a little bit of creation science here. I don't want to dismiss the reality that this is a spiritual story. This is God's power. That's reason number one. God decided they were going to live to be 977 years old. That's why they were that old, okay? That's reason number one. Let's talk about some other ideas that kind of fit into the creation narrative. Okay. How many of you have ever heard about the idea of a firmament? Firmament. Okay? Well, we get into the beginning of Genesis where they talk about the waters above and the waters below. The waters below are what, most likely? Oceans, lakes, whatever there was. There is something to suggest, too, that there might have been, a really interesting area of archaeology right now is they find cultures consistently off the shore of countries. Sometimes 100 yards, sometimes 200, 500 yards off where the beach is now, there's like an ancient culture that's underwater. And perhaps it was because during the time of the flood, pre-flood, maybe the oceans were less because there was water in the firmament above the heavens. So we have the earth, we have the oceans, we have a separation. I'm going to go to this other picture here. A separation, and then you have the water above. Now the water does a couple of things. It screens out UV radiation. How many of you have ever had a plastic play set for your kids or your grandkids? And then you leave it outside for a couple of years. What happens? It fades big time. You leave it out long enough, it'll what? It'll break down completely. The plastic will turn to brittleness where you can crush it with your fingers, right? That's what UV radiation is doing to plastic. What's it doing to you, right? So what if during the firmament time you have a natural protection against UV radiation? There are some people who suggest, too, that the firmament, with its weight, you've got all this water above and the air or whatever in between. I think this gap is kind of aggrandized in this picture. It's bigger than it would have actually been, right? What happens when all of that water is pressing down on the air that's around the world? And also, what happens when you've got far more plant life in the world than you have people or animals? Say it again. You have way more oxygen than you do currently now. And what do you have? You have oxygen under pressure from a firmament that's pressing down upon it. You have a natural hyperbaric chamber. Yeah. I'm stealing a lot of this from Brian. Yeah, which is when you think about what that does to the human body. I can know there's a difference here. How many of you have ever been at altitude, like Denver or somewhere like that, and you feel like you're slowly dying for about 4 or 5 days? We went to Flagstaff to visit some of Laura's old friends one time in college, and I was like, I'm going to die. I've lived my whole life like basically at sea level or below sea level in the Great Plains, and now I'm way up in the mountains and I can't breathe. But you adjust to it as well, you know. So there was a really cool experiment. I think it was in Japan. A fellow put a tomato plant. I think it was a cherry tomato plant. Was it cherry or regular tomato? Can't remember. Cherry tomato plant in a hyperbaric chamber, screened out UV radiation, and the plant grew to be about 3 stories tall. One tomato plant lived to be about, 35 years old? Or it might still be alive today, I can't remember. And the tomatoes it created were the size of softballs. Okay? Being in a hyperbaric chamber, under pressure, in an oxygen-rich environment, and UV radiation screened off. So I'm not saying that these things created the situation. What I'm saying is I think they're evidence to suggest that the flood story is real, that real things happen, and the things that happened in the flood had consequences for all of humankind afterwards. What you find after the flood is what? We go from like 900 years to what? It starts slowly tapering off until you get to like the most, real important figure, David. David lives to be about 80-some years old. And that's a normal lifespan at that time. So things really taper off. And I think it has to do with this stuff. The firmament falls. So the rains come, and this firmament around the earth falls when the flood narrative happens, and then also the fountains of the deep open up. Some people think this is also when plate tectonics started happening, that there were great stores of water underneath the Earth's surface, and then when they all came out, the Earth's surface cracked and then kind of settled and then started moving after that. You know? The really cool part about that is I have this. This is a recent thing that's been found within the last year or two. They've been doing deep core drilling. That's all thanks to some of the work they've done. Fracking. The fracking technology has really gone forward now, and they're learning more and more how to way deep, and they're getting over some of the problems of drilling down deep where it gets hot. They're figuring out how to deal with those problems as well. Well, anyway, down deep, what they're finding is a material called ringwoodite. Everybody heard this term before? Ringwoodite. It is a it is a crystal, a rock that contains water inside the rock. It's porous and it's got all kinds of water in it, and there's just tons of it down deep. There are people who suggest there might be more water underneath the Earth's crust than there is above it, which is crazy to think of. Which also, I think, makes a lot of sense, this idea of the fountains of the deep opening, but also what would happen if the Lord wanted the waters to recede and go back to where they were? What would you have? You'd have a bunch of water underneath the Earth's surface. Where else is it going to go? Right? Okay. So I want to get back to, let's see, I think I talked about the life. Yeah, I just want to talk about the long lifespans because it is in that chapter. We get into chapter 6 then. I'll take just a few more minutes. When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and the daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw the daughters of man were attractive. By the way, do you find it hard to believe that in some way, if you go back about 10 or 15, 25 generations, we're probably all closely related? Is that hard to swallow? Well, that's in Aberdeen, that's true. Everybody is like, oh yeah, they're so-and-so's sister. Oh, really? I had no idea. I don't think it's so hard. I think Exodus comes in and God tells people to stop marrying their sisters because of the continuing problem of sin and the wreckage that it wrecks upon creation, the UV radiation, all this stuff. Our gene breaks down. And the weaker it gets, the more problems you have when you're when you're marrying sisters or cousins or things like that, right? Anybody who's ever done animal husbandry knows this, right? What do you do to make sure you have strong animals? You try to crossbreed them as much as possible with maybe an animal from a different farm or even a different state, right? This is not rocket science. You guys understand this. So there comes a time where we do need to answer this question. Who are Adam and Eve's sons marrying? They're marrying their sisters, okay? We just need to swallow hard and get over this, okay? That's what's happening. These are the only people that live on the earth. But I think it says something to what God does in that he put in you such a disdain for marrying a cousin or a sister in Exodus that even now you look back upon when it was completely acceptable and you think that is disgusting. That's God's design. That's what he wants because he knows having kids with your sister or your cousins or whatever is not good for you. So what I'm saying is, as you look back on it and you're kind of disgusted by that, you should also realize like that's a gift from God that he did that to you in the first place so that you don't make these mistakes. He wants you to be this way. To not want to marry your sister or your brother. That's what I'm saying. And that's okay, right? Up until that point, this is what happens. So what causes mankind to grow so rapidly? Well, the environment. There's plenty to eat. There's not many people. There's plenty of space. There's nothing. What happens to a rabbit population when you kill all the coyotes and foxes in the neighborhood? It explodes. So just think about it that way. That's what's happening right now. They're exploding because there's plenty for everybody. There's no need to not stop, right? Then what else? Lack of birth control. Are there a lot of Netflix miniseries to watch this time? No. Are there a lot of NFL playoff games to attend? There are not. There's not a lot of entertainment in the ancient world, i.e., don't be surprised when people are having kids. It's a fun thing to do. Okay? Lack of birth control. There's no way to have sexual relations and not have children. I mean, I want you to think about right now in your marriage, if you never used any sort of birth control your whole life, how many kids would you have had? Right? So it shouldn't be surprising that the population just takes off. And then environmental genetic problems, limiting birth rate, are not there yet because Romans 8, 22, 23 says, creation groans under the weight of sin, but that weight is cumulative, right? It starts with Adam and Eve and it continues till now. So I think sometimes then we can look at creation and understand why everything is so messed up because that weight of sin is cumulative. It's continuing to add in to and the reason why I think this is there was a festival called the Festival of Atonement in the ancient temple. And why would they do that? Every year they would purify the temple because people would come into the temple and people are sinful. And just like summer, or like the winter when we have snow outside, what happens to your carpets? They get dark. Why? Because people are tracking in their mud and their sand from outside. So the effect of sin on the temple is cumulative, and unless we do the Festival of Atonement every year, what's going to happen? Eventually, the temple is going to be probably unusable. I don't know. But God's saying, like, we need that this is cumulative every year. It needs to be taken care of every year, right? And Romans kind of points to that too. So that cumulative sin hasn't really attached itself to creation. So the population is just exploding, right? Eventually, they would probably bang up against the carrying capacity of the environment. The reason why our population keeps going forward is we keep finding ways to break that barrier. And a lot of it has to do with the farmers in our country, right? They find new and interesting ways to create more and more food out of the same amount of land, the same amount of resources. It's pretty amazing when you think about it. What is his name, Borlaug? Borlaug should be held up as probably one of the most important people in the last 100 years, right? Does anybody know who Borlaug is? He's the guy who basically pioneered hybridization of seeds. And he created seeds that were rust and mold resistant in the country. And it's a big reason why we are so productive as a country in terms of farming. Anyway. And then math. I was just going to show, like, okay, so if you're two people and you have, like, let's say at least, I don't know, 10 kids. And all those 10 kids have 10 kids. And all those 10 kids have 10 kids. Do you see where I'm going with this? It goes we all think it would take a really long, it doesn't take long. It does not take long for the population of the earth to just take off, right? There's this latent period, and then all of a sudden, bam, it's just gonna, because of exponential things, it's just gonna take off. And this is where we are at chapter 6 then, right? When man began to multiply on the face of the earth and daughters were born to men, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive. They took them as wives as they chose. Now, going back here, I can give you this answer really quick because I think it's definitive, and I'll stop there, I promise. Okay, we get right here. Who are the sons of God? The sons of God are Sethites. The sons of God are people from the line of Seth. What's the problem? They took wives from this area and this area. And why is that a problem? Because their only basis for choosing wives was not based upon who actually follows God, but rather who is the most attractive. They fall down to their worst impulses. They marry women only because of how they look, not because of who they are. And they're flirting with people who have already shown, as I said before, that there's cracks in the mask here already. There's problems here already, right? So they start marrying these people. So the sons of God marry the daughters of men, and we create all kinds of problems, including Nephilim. We can maybe pick it up there next week at Nephilim, just describe them more. Okay, any questions? Well, we don't have time for questions anyway, so you just got to hold until next week. Let's pray the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. I'm going to give you a little fun thing, a little tidbit to walk away with. So, how many of you have heard of Göbekli Tepe? Göbekli Tepe is one of these ancient sites that they think is older than Stonehenge. It's older than the pyramids. And on Göbekli Tepe, they have pictures depicting people letting animals out of stalls. And how far is it from Noah's Ark? Well, here's Noah's Ark, at least what we think is Noah's Ark on Mount Ararat. And here's Göbekli Tepe. Some people think that Göbekli Tepe was the place where Noah sacrificed after the flood. And that's the reason why it was buried. They did a little research on it, and then the people in Turkey buried it because they didn't want any site proving Christian or Jewish truths right. Fun stuff, huh? That'll make you think. See you later. No, I'll just give you my presentation. You can do with it what you